Dwight D. Eisenhower, one of America's most influential figures, left an indelible mark on both war and peace. A man of both war and peace, he used a firm hand and a vision of greatness to lead the country through turbulent times. From his modest upbringing to his ascent to prominence as a military leader and eventually as the 34th President of the United States, Eisenhower's legacy weaves throughout the country's history. The significance and enduring influence of Dwight D. Eisenhower on American history are extensive and varied. Eisenhower, the 34th President of the United States, guided the country through a period of profound change on the home and foreign fronts. As Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces during World War II, he gained international respect and cemented his reputation as a master military strategist. Throughout his 53-61 administration, Eisenhower demonstrated a practical approach to leadership and a steadfast dedication to maintaining national unity. He oversaw the development of the American economy and the execution of significant infrastructure projects like the interstate highway system at a time of comparatively good fortune and stability. Eisenhower aimed to prevent the rise of communism and preserve the balance of power during the Cold War through his foreign policy measures, which included the creation of strategic alliances like NATO. Eisenhower's dedication to desegregation and civil rights has had a long-lasting effect on American culture. His commitment to maintaining the values of justice and equality was evident in his implementation of the Supreme Court's ruling in Brown v. Board of Education and the sending of federal troops to Little Rock, Arkansas, to force the integration of public schools. Beyond his term in office, Eisenhower left a lasting legacy that shaped American history and impacted later political generations. His focus on national security, fiscal prudence, and bipartisanship is still relevant in today's policy conversations and debates. Ultimately, the legacy of Dwight D. Eisenhower is rooted in his unwavering contributions to the prosperity and strength of the U.S., as well as his personification of the principles that characterize U.S. culture. The 14th of October, 1890, saw the birth of Dwight David Eisenhower, popularly known as Ike, in Denison, Texas. He was the third of David Jacob and Ida Elizabeth Stover Eisenhower's 7 sons. Later on, the family relocated to Abilene, Kansas, where Eisenhower spent most of his early years growing up. The principles of discipline, hard labor, and patriotism established by his parents influenced Eisenhower's early years. His mother was a devoted Mennonite who placed a high value on education, whereas his father supported the family by working as a mechanic and in other occupations. The Eisenhower family, despite their meager circumstances, valued education and civic engagement highly. Eisenhower was an energetic and aspirational young man who grew up in Abilene. He was a natural leader on and off the pitch and was an excellent athlete, especially in football. His early involvement in the Boy Scouts helped him develop a feeling of responsibility and altruism, which would later guide his career in both the military and politics. Eisenhower had a strong basis for success because of his family history. He was inspired to do well academically by his parents' emphasis on education, and in 1909 he graduated from Abilene High School. After graduating from high school, Eisenhower took on a variety of professions to help pay for his undergraduate education. He received an appointment to the USMA at West Point in 1911. All things considered, Eisenhower's early years and familial history prepared him for his subsequent successes. The principles of diligence, honesty, and patriotism instilled in him during his early years would mold his personality and impact his future as a military commander and statesman. His schooling and military training greatly influenced the formation of Dwight D. Eisenhower's extraordinary career as a military commander and statesman. Eisenhower started a demanding academic and military training program in 1911 after being appointed to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Eisenhower excelled as a capable and well-behaved cadet at West Point. He excelled academically and showed great leadership abilities, graduating in 1915 close to the top of his class. He gained a strong foundation in engineering, leadership, and military strategy during his time at West Point, which helped him succeed in the military. After graduating from West Point, Eisenhower received a commission as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army. In the beginning, he held a variety of staff and training duties, which helped him hone his military officer abilities and acquire useful expertise in operations and logistics. Even though Eisenhower did not participate in any combat, the First World War significantly benefited his military career. Instead, the U.S. sent him to training camps where he helped prepare soldiers for their journey to Europe. Eisenhower's experiences during this period strengthened his devotion to duty and gave him important insights into military organization and readiness, even if his actual engagement in the battle was little. Eisenhower kept rising in the U.S. ranks following World War I, occupying a variety of staff and leadership roles. Through a number of military academies and training programs, including the Army War College and the Command and General Staff College, he continued his education by studying international relations, leadership philosophy, and military strategy. Eisenhower's selection as Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces during World War II was the result of his military experience and education. His strategic thinking, leadership abilities, and diplomatic grace were vital to the Allied victory in Europe. All things considered, Eisenhower's education and military training gave him the information, expertise, and experience he needed to successfully negotiate the difficulties of war and global leadership. One of the most admired military leaders in American history, he owes his success to his lifelong dedication to education and career advancement. Early in his career, Dwight D. Eisenhower showed leadership qualities and accomplished a number of noteworthy tasks that anticipated his success as a statesman and military commander in the future. After graduating from West Point, Eisenhower served in the U.S. Army and made one of his first noteworthy accomplishments. After showcasing his leadership qualities early on, he was given several significant responsibilities, one of which was assisting General John J. Pershing in 1916 during the Pancho Villa expedition along the Mexican-American border. Eisenhower was able to learn personally about military operations and diplomacy in a tumultuous international setting thanks to this encounter. Eisenhower's leadership abilities were evident during the interwar years as he handled a number of progressively significant staff and command positions. Interestingly, he worked in the Philippines as an executive officer for General Douglas MacArthur, who was the U.S. Army's chief of staff at the time. Eisenhower gained important knowledge about strategic planning and high-level military decision-making from this position. During World War II, Eisenhower's leadership responsibilities became even greater, and he was essential to the Allied war effort. His appointment as Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces in Europe in 1942 was one of his greatest successes. In this role, Eisenhower oversaw the preparation and implementation of Operation Overlord, the greatest amphibious assault in history that finally resulted in the liberation of Western Europe from Nazi rule. Throughout his early career, Eisenhower stood out as a rising star in the U.S. military due to his capacity to instill confidence, promote teamwork, and make difficult decisions under duress. He was widely praised and recognized for his leadership during World War II, which cemented his standing as one of the most accomplished military leaders of his era. In general, Eisenhower's noteworthy accomplishments and early leadership positions prepared the way for his success as a politician and military commander in the future. His strategic vision, strong leadership, and unwavering devotion to duty would define his legacy and influence future generations' understanding of American history. As the Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces in Europe, Dwight D. Eisenhower was especially important during World War II. In 1942, Eisenhower assumed this role and spearheaded the planning of the Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe, culminating in the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944. The success of Operation Overlord, the codename for the invasion of Normandy, was largely due to Eisenhower's leadership during its planning and execution. With dexterity, he brought together the various Allied forces, American, British, Canadian, and others, and coordinated their activities. Eisenhower maintained his composure and commitment in the face of enormous logistical difficulties and the uncertainty surrounding the operation's result, winning the respect and confidence of his subordinates. An important turning point in the war was the D-Day landings, when Allied forces took control of France and started the process of freeing Western Europe from Nazi rule. The beachheads along the Normandy coast were secured, thanks in large part to Eisenhower's resolute leadership and strategic vision, which enabled him to overcome German opposition. The creation of major diplomatic coalitions like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was one of Eisenhower's greatest accomplishments. Eisenhower was instrumental in the 1949 creation of NATO because he understood the need for a collective defense against the threat of Soviet expansionism. In order to maintain stability and prevent aggression during the Cold War, the alliance gave Western democracies a framework for military cooperation and mutual defense. All things considered, Dwight D. Eisenhower's strategic judgment calls and alliances shaped both the outcome of World War II and the geopolitical environment that followed. His ability to lead the Allied forces through difficult military and political situations while upholding their unity helped the Allies win in Europe and set the stage for the prosperity and peace that followed the war. Dwight D. Eisenhower made significant and far-reaching contributions to the post-war global order. Eisenhower was instrumental in advancing peace, security, and prosperity in the wake of World War II, both as the 34th President of the United States and as Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces. A key goal of Eisenhower's post-war administration was to stop the militarism and hostility that had sparked two catastrophic global wars from resurfacing. As president, he pushed for disarmament and arms control policies to lessen the likelihood of nuclear war, while simultaneously pursuing a containment strategy against the Soviet Union and the development of communism. Eisenhower's leadership in forging organizations and coalitions to further international collaboration and collective security is his most significant contribution to the formation of the world order. The creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, in 1949 was one of his greatest accomplishments. In order to prevent Soviet expansionism and maintain peace and stability in Europe during the Cold War, NATO gave Western democracies a framework for military cooperation and mutual defense. Eisenhower also promoted economic development and integration as crucial elements of the post-war order. He was in favor of programs like the Marshall Plan, which offered financial support to help reconstruct Europe after the war and promote economic growth. Eisenhower understood that preserving political stability and halting the spread of communism in susceptible areas required economic development. Eisenhower's foreign policy strategy placed a strong emphasis on the role that engagement and diplomacy play in settling disputes between nations and advancing peace. In addition to famously using covert action and brinkmanship tactics to handle crises and discourage aggression, he also promoted discussion and negotiation as alternatives to conflict as a way to settle disagreements. All things considered, Eisenhower's influence on the post-World War II global order set the stage for decades of prosperity and peace. His foresight in forging partnerships, advancing economic growth, and arguing for diplomacy and arms limitation contributed to the preservation of stability in a world that was changing quickly and helped avert another global conflict. After 20 years of Democratic administrations, Dwight D. Eisenhower's presidential campaign and victory in 1952 signaled a dramatic shift in American politics and the beginning of the Republican era. Eisenhower's popularity crossed party lines, making him a desirable candidate for both Republicans and Democrats. He was a well-respected military leader, especially for his position as Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces during World War II. Recognizing Eisenhower's wide appeal and leadership abilities, the Republican Party unified in support of him as their presidential choice. Themes of wealth, security, and national unity dominated Eisenhower's campaign. He pledged to halt the Korean War, which was losing support from the American people, and to put the federal government back to its previous level of efficiency and integrity. Voters yearning for a change in leadership and tired of partisan politics responded well to Eisenhower's message. Eisenhower's selection of Senator Richard Nixon of California as his running mate was a major contributing factor to his campaign's success. Nixon was a youthful, vibrant candidate who attracted conservative supporters, especially in the West, and helped balance the ticket. Illinois Governor Adlai Stevenson, the Democratic nominee, ran against Eisenhower in the general election. Eisenhower had a major edge over Stevenson because of his fame and stature as a military hero, even if Stevenson was intelligent and eloquent. Eisenhower actively pursued his candidature by traveling the nation, making speeches, and showing up at gatherings. Eisenhower defeated Stevenson handily on November 4, 1952, taking 55.2% of the popular vote and 442 electoral votes to Stevenson's 89. With his win, the Republican Party took back control of the White House for the first time in 20 years, indicating a change in the political climate in the U.S. There were high expectations for Eisenhower's ability to guide the nation through a period of both internal and foreign challenges when he won the presidency. Though he would face many difficulties and great successes throughout his presidency, his election and successful campaign helped usher in a new period of Republican-led American politics. Dwight D. Eisenhower dedicated his domestic policy initiatives as President of the United States to modernization, infrastructural development, and social improvement. The interstate highway system and the expansion of social programs are two of his most noteworthy projects. Eisenhower's 1956 signing of the interstate highway system into law made it one of the most massive infrastructure projects in American history. Eisenhower realized the strategic significance of a contemporary, interconnected highway network for national defense, economic growth, and mobility after being inspired by his experiences as a military leader during World War II. By linking the nation's largest cities and regions, the system sought to increase national security, encourage interstate commerce, and improve the effectiveness of transportation. The interstate highway system transformed the United States travel and transportation industries by making it easier to carry people, products, and services across great distances. It changed the American environment, promoted suburban community growth, and accelerated economic development. Eisenhower's vision for the highway system reflected his confidence in the ability of infrastructure investment to spur development and prosperity. Eisenhower's domestic agenda includes the growth of social programs to address urgent social and economic issues, in addition to the interstate highway system. His administration's formation of the Department of Health, Education and Welfare WWII, in 1953 was one of the biggest social programs. WWII improved social service coordination and streamlined government operations by combining many federal agencies in charge of welfare, education, and health policy. Additionally, Eisenhower backed programs aimed at bolstering social security, enhancing healthcare accessibility, and increasing American educational prospects. In order to give seniors and other vulnerable groups more financial stability, his administration promoted the expansion of Social Security benefits, boosted spending for public health and education, and made investments in medical research. All things considered, Eisenhower's domestic policy endeavors demonstrated a practical approach to leadership and a dedication to funding the country's social welfare and infrastructure. For decades, the United States experienced economic growth, social advancement, and mobility thanks to his leadership in building the interstate highway system and growing social programs. The Cold War environment, characterized by the ideological and geopolitical struggle between the US and the USSR, significantly influenced Dwight D. Eisenhower's foreign policy priorities during his administration. A key goal of Eisenhower's foreign policy was to prevent the Soviet Union's influence from growing globally and to stop the spread of communism. Eisenhower employed a containment strategy to accomplish this goal, which sought to restrain Soviet aggression and assist friendly governments in weak areas. To further this goal, the Eisenhower administration employed a range of military, diplomatic, and economic strategies. He was in favor of the rollback strategy, which included covert operations and military action to undo communist victories in nations like Vietnam and Korea. In addition, Eisenhower gave financial and military support to governments and rebel organizations opposing communism in areas like Europe, Asia, and Latin America that were in danger of communist growth. Eisenhower emphasized nuclear deterrence as a key component of U.S. foreign policy, in addition to containment. Eisenhower supported a policy of nuclear brinkmanship, which involves keeping a credible nuclear deterrent while attempting to avoid direct conflict with the Soviet Union in recognition of the existential threat posed by nuclear weapons. He placed a strong emphasis on the need for military readiness and made significant investments in the development of nuclear weapons and strategic defense systems, which included building missile silos and deploying bombers and submarines with nuclear warheads. Eisenhower's foreign policy also underscored the significance of alliances and collective security agreements in thwarting Soviet aggression and advancing stability. Through programs like the Eisenhower Doctrine, he was instrumental in building new connections with developing nations and reinforcing already existing alliances like the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, SEATO, and NATO. All things considered, Dwight D. Eisenhower's Cold War foreign policy objectives demonstrated a dedication to upholding American interests, encouraging stability, and halting the rise of communism. During one of the most turbulent and dangerous times in modern history, his strategic approach to diplomacy, nuclear deterrence, and alliance building served to reduce the likelihood of international conflict and maintain peace. During his presidency, Dwight D. Eisenhower adopted a nuanced approach to desegregation and civil rights that reflected the intricacies and difficulties of the 1950s and 1960s civil rights movements. The famous 1954 Brown versus Board of Education ruling, one of the most significant events of Eisenhower's presidency, declared racial segregation in public schools to be unlawful. Declaring that the decision was a victory for freedom and a step towards obtaining equality for all Americans, Eisenhower openly endorsed the decision. His approach to enacting desegregation, however, was more circumspect and methodical. Eisenhower thought that honoring the federal judiciary's authority and maintaining the rule of law were important. Despite his personal support for desegregation, He was aware of the political and social climate of the day, which included strong opposition to integration in many states. Because of this, Eisenhower first took a laissez-faire attitude to implementing desegregation, preferring to let local governments carry out the Supreme Court's decision at their own leisure. Eisenhower's desegregation strategy, however, changed in reaction to growing hostilities and defiance of the court's mandated integration. He had to step in when Governor Orville Forbes of Arkansas ordered the state's National Guard to stop Central High School from becoming integrated in 1957. In an effort to enforce desegregation and preserve the rule of law, Eisenhower federalized the National Guard and sent soldiers to safely accompany the African American kids into the school. Eisenhower has received criticism for his overall civil rights record, even in spite of this decisive move at Little Rock. His approach to the burgeoning racial equality movement, according to some civil rights leaders and activists, was inadequate and lacked the urgency required to confront structural racism and discrimination. People perceived Eisenhower as squandering opportunities to bring about significant change due to his unwillingness to advocate for comprehensive civil rights legislation and his sparing use of his authority to accelerate desegregation. Nevertheless, Eisenhower's administration was a significant turning point in the civil rights movement, laying the groundwork for later initiatives to end segregation and achieve racial equality in the U.S. His readiness to face down opposition to desegregation and defend the values of justice and equality paved the way for the larger civil rights movement of the 1960s and beyond. When Dwight D. Eisenhower's administration and accomplishments are evaluated, various areas of criticism and controversy are revealed, along with a complex legacy marked by notable successes in both domestic and international affairs. Eisenhower's deft handling of Cold War foreign policy was one of his most noteworthy accomplishments. Eisenhower showed great leadership and strategic vision while serving as the supreme commander of the Allied expeditionary forces in World War II. These qualities helped him in his role as president. He advocated for nuclear deterrence to stop the start of a world war, while pursuing a containment strategy to thwart Soviet expansionism and advance stability. During a turbulent time in international affairs, Eisenhower's emphasis on diplomacy, alliances, and military readiness served to reduce the likelihood of escalation and maintain peace. Significant accomplishments were also made under Eisenhower's domestic program, chief among them being the construction of the interstate highway system. The development of the interstate highway system transformed American transportation and promoted interstate trade, economic expansion, and mobility. Eisenhower's administration also managed the growth of social programs, including the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and provided more financing for healthcare and public education. Eisenhower's administration was not without difficulties and disagreements, though. His cautious attitude towards integration and civil rights has been cited by critics, who contend that he should have done more to achieve racial equality while in office. Historians and civil rights advocates have criticized Eisenhower for his failure to pursue comprehensive racial rights legislation and for how he handled situations like the Little Rock crisis. In addition, Eisenhower's government came under fire for how it handled the economy, especially in the midst of the 1958 recession. Even while Eisenhower enacted policies like tax cuts and deregulation to combat inflation and spur economic growth, others said that his actions disadvantaged Americans from the working class in favor of corporate interests. There is a general divide in opinions regarding Dwight D. Eisenhower's administration and accomplishments. Although he has received a lot of recognition for his leadership during the Cold War, his performance on domestic matters like economic policy and civil rights has come under fire. Still, Eisenhower's presidency had a profound effect on American politics and society, influencing the history of the country in important ways. Long-lasting and significant, Dwight D. Eisenhower's impact on American politics, military policy, and diplomatic relations shaped the history of the country for many years following his administration. Eisenhower's pragmatic approach to administration and leadership style in American politics established the standard for subsequent presidents. His capacity to forge consensus and work across party lines helped to create a post-war era of comparatively stable politics and bipartisanship. Eisenhower's emphasis on economic restraint and minimal government intrusion has left a lasting impression on conservative ideology, influencing generations of Republican leaders. Eisenhower's approach to national security and defense in military strategy was shaped by his time serving as the Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces during World War II. Throughout the Cold War, his support for a potent military and a containment and deterrence strategy influenced American military tactics. Eisenhower's conviction on the value of alliances and plans for collective security also served as a foundation for organizations like NATO, which are still essential to U.S. defense strategy. During the Cold War, Eisenhower's dedication to diplomacy, negotiation, and conflict resolution assisted in managing crises and reducing tensions. His readiness to open lines of communication and conversation with enemies, like the Soviet Union, established a standard for upcoming diplomatic initiatives to advance peace and stability. A thaw in Cold War tensions was facilitated by Eisenhower's philosophy of peaceful coexistence with the Soviet Union and his support for disarmament and armament control, which also opened the door for more diplomatic achievements. All things considered, it is impossible to dispute Dwight D. Eisenhower's lasting impact on American politics, military doctrine, and diplomatic ties. His vision and leadership paved the way for the U.S. to maintain its leading position around the globe and shaped its place in it. Eisenhower left behind a legacy that still has resonance in contemporary American politics and international affairs, thanks to his practical approach to government and dedication to peace and stability. The distinctive fusion of pragmatism, diplomacy, and strategic thinking that defines Dwight D. Eisenhower's leadership style is still relevant and important in the conversation on modern leadership. Eisenhower's leadership style was characterized by his capacity to maintain composure under duress, a trait he developed while serving in the military. He showed a knack for strategic thinking by carefully analyzing his options and thinking through the long-term effects of his choices. Eisenhower demonstrated his strategic leadership approach by handling intricate military operations and foreign policy issues throughout World War II and during his presidency. Another characteristic of Eisenhower's leadership style was diplomacy. He understood the need for establishing connections and encouraging collaboration between opponents and allies alike. During the Cold War, Eisenhower's openness to communication and compromise served to ease tensions and end hostilities, proving the value of diplomacy in bringing about understanding and peace. One characteristic that set Eisenhower apart in his leadership style was pragmatism. He was renowned for his capacity to tackle difficult issues head-on and frequently went above partisan politics to advance agreement and advancement. Eisenhower's handling of domestic issues like the economy and civil rights, where he attempted to strike a balance between contending interests and give priority to the greater good, demonstrated his pragmatic approach to governing. For a number of reasons, Eisenhower's leadership approach is still relevant in today's leadership discourse. First, in a world marked by unpredictability and fast change, his emphasis on long-term planning and strategic thinking is still essential. Today's leaders can benefit from Eisenhower's emphasis on thorough analysis and evaluation of possible outcomes in his decision-making process. Secondly, Eisenhower's dedication to communication and diplomacy serves as a reminder of the value of establishing rapport, looking for common ground when settling disputes, and encouraging collaboration. Eisenhower's emphasis on diplomacy as an instrument for peace is still relevant today, in an era of geopolitical tensions and global concerns. Finally, Eisenhower's pragmatic approach to leadership offers valuable lessons for leaders facing intricate and varied challenges. Eisenhower was able to get through difficult periods and make significant progress by putting a priority on finding workable solutions and fostering consensus. In conclusion, people still view Dwight D. Eisenhower's management style as a paradigm of pragmatism, diplomacy, and strategic thinking. For leaders looking to make a lasting impression while navigating the difficulties of the modern world, his legacy provides inspiration and direction. The way that the public and historians view Dwight D. Eisenhower's legacy has changed over time, reflecting both the complexity of his presidency and the shifting political climate in the U.S. Eisenhower had a great deal of respect and popularity during his administration, going by the moniker Ike and winning 2 landslide elections in 1952 and 1956. His leadership in the Second World War and his dedication to maintaining peace and stability during the Cold War won him admiration. Voters responded favorably to Eisenhower's emphasis on national security, infrastructure development, and fiscal restraint, which helped to solidify his reputation as a capable and dependable leader. Many Americans had positive opinions of Eisenhower's legacy in the years immediately after his presidency. In contrast to the turbulent events of the previous decades, his government was characterized by relative tranquility, technological innovation, and economic prosperity. Eisenhower's conservative attitude towards social progress and civil rights, however, left much to be desired, according to some critics, especially in light of the expanding civil rights movement of the 1960s. Historical evaluations of Eisenhower's legacy have evolved over the decades since his administration. Although most people still view Eisenhower as a successful president who skillfully and strategically handled the challenges posed by the Cold War, historians and academics disagree about how much he accomplished and how much he fell short of. Eisenhower's enforcement of desegregation, decrees and nomination of justices to the Supreme Court, who would subsequently uphold significant civil rights decisions, positively contribute to the advancement of civil rights. Another notable achievement of his presidency is his leadership in constructing the interstate highway system and stimulating economic growth. Eisenhower's performance on civil rights has nevertheless drawn criticism, especially for his early unwillingness to step strongly in favor of desegregation and his inability to pursue comprehensive civil rights legislation. Furthermore, some academics contend that Eisenhower's focus on nuclear deterrence and military spending increased tensions with the Soviet Union and contributed to the militarization of American society. Opinions and priorities generally shape people's perceptions and historical assessments of Dwight D. Eisenhower's legacy. Eisenhower's administration is considered a symbol of the complexity and paradoxes of American politics in the middle of the 20th century, even though he is recognized as a successful president who led the country through a time of extraordinary upheaval and uncertainty. The lasting impact of Dwight D. Eisenhower serves as a tribute to the strength of ethics, leadership, and commitment to public service. His military and civilian achievements in American history continue to influence the course of the country and motivate coming generations. Eisenhower's leadership during World War II is one of his lasting legacies. In his capacity as Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces, he oversaw one of the biggest military campaigns in history, which resulted in the liberation of Europe from Nazi oppression. In moments of crisis, his strategic vision, decisive action, and dedication to the Allied cause epitomize what makes a great leader. Additionally, Eisenhower's presidency had a long-lasting effect on American politics and society. His focus on national defense, infrastructure development, and budgetary restraint set the stage for decades of scientific advancement and economic prosperity. In particular, the interstate highway system transformed transportation and aided in national economic expansion and urbanization. Furthermore, Eisenhower's approach to foreign policy, characterized by diplomacy, alliances, and nuclear deterrence, continues to influence U.S. strategy in an increasingly complex and interconnected globe. His dedication to fostering international security and collaboration set the stage for later diplomatic initiatives to further these goals, as well as for organizations like NATO. Furthermore, Eisenhower's leadership in expanding civil rights, despite the political climate of the day, contributed to the larger fight for racial equality in the U.S. His backing for historic civil rights legislation and his execution of desegregation decrees laid the groundwork for the movement's revolutionary shifts in the 1960s and beyond. All things considered, Eisenhower's legacy will always be significant because of his unshakable commitment to the values of progress, leadership, and service. Future leaders might learn from his example, which emphasizes the value of honesty, modesty, and dedication to the common good. In our quest for a brighter future for everybody, Eisenhower's legacy never ceases to motivate and direct us as the problems of the contemporary world change. The character of Dwight D. Eisenhower was nuanced and conflicting. In addition to being a well-liked president who presided over an era of relative peace and economic prosperity, he was a superb military strategist who guided the Allies to victory in World War II. He did, however, also advocate the toppling of democratically elected governments and approve the use of nuclear weapons as a Cold War warrior. The legacy of Eisenhower is still up for discussion. According to some historians, he was a superb leader who prevented communism and fascism from taking over the world. Some contend that he was a belligerent who fostered the conditions that led to the Cold War and the Vietnam War. In the end, Eisenhower left behind a conflicting legacy. He was a man of immense accomplishments as well as significant weaknesses.